behind the screen for DM's Table, we discuss all things concerning running a successful tabletop game. For this one, we hand over to Dan. What have you got for us today?
Most Games Masters or Dungeon Masters, they will sit blissfully in their own daydreams and they will think up the most awesome storylines and plots with which they can wow and amaze their players. And then they bring this story to the table and watch in horror as their players break the narrative.
Oh, yes.
They got off the forbidden path.
Absolutely. So, yes, today we're going to have a little look into breaking the narrative, which is to say what happens when your meticulously well-laid plan does not quite go to plan. And there are a number of reasons why this could happen. There are also a number of things that you can do to mitigate or recover from certain unexpected twists and turns in your plots that usually your players have decided to throw at you. But at the same time, we have got a few points here where you can turn the tables on them. So, if anyone does happen to watch kind of Critical Role media, some of the most celebrated things that they do are when Matt Mercer ceremoniously page tears. He'll have a page of notes. His players will say one thing instead of the other. He will look down. He will close his eyes. And there will be the sound of paper ripping and two halves disappearing behind him, one over each shoulder. It's a risk that we take if we have really meticulous, thick kind of plot points or notes that we've made ahead of time. But especially if they rely on the path going along a certain path. Now, the way I kind of try to avoid this, whenever it's worth when you're making notes for an upcoming session, when you're kind of formulating ideas, rather than creating like a specific scenario, the party will fight these people in this place at this time with these things happening. That's a very specific set of things that the players can break and mess around with. So instead, if you try to create circumstances, like if you build the circumstances of for example, an encounter, if it fluctuates more, then you can kind of drop it in and it will move and morph and warp to fit what your players are doing, rather than trying to corral the players into a set area. It's like herding cats. So instead of saying the players will fight these people at this place at this time with these things, just say this group of antagonists are going to challenge the party
Somewhere.
and they'll use this. Yeah. So if you're not including the party in your plans, in inverted commas, it's easy to insert them in after the fact. Also, by doing that, by kind of disconnecting your plot from any specific locations, you also get the ability to recycle. Now, there might be some people that turn their nose up when I suggest this, but there is the railroad. Generally speaking, Games Masters should try to avoid railroading their players wherever they can. And by that, I mean kind of vetoing a player decision and saying, no, you can't do that. I want you to do this. That's bad, Games Master etiquette. That said, if you've got something planned for your players, if they turn left and then they decide to turn right, well, if you haven't inherently tied whatever was happening over there to a specific location, you can recycle that.
You just move it.
Recycle that, absolutely.
You move it to the right.
Some people refer to this as the invisible railroad, which again might kind of make you screw your nose up a little bit. But if your players are traveling from A to B to C to D, who's to say they know exactly where B, C, and D are? If you have the ability to be able to move those points to be in front of the players, then your players still have a choice in how they approach things, and you still have the ability to drop in your prepared notes in front of them.
Is this specific to encounters or story beats?
Absolutely anything. So if you create a cool NPC that you think, oh, this person is the mayor of Abletown, and the players instead turn around and go to Beebleville, then just move the mayor. If you've prepared some really cool stuff for that NPC, just move them around. The players would never know.
The illusion of free choice is usually enough as well, as long as they believe they're making the choice. Like, this is where I find the original railroad fine, because if my players think that they've made the choice, they don't know, as you said, they don't know that the path they didn't take is exactly the same as the path they do.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there are some caveats when it comes to using the invisible railroad. Like, don't think you're being invisible about it, but actually you're not. You know, there is some kind of subtlety to it. Sometimes the players will throw your narrative so far for a loop that you've actually got nothing. At which point you find yourself hiding behind your DM screen in that kind of fight or flight mode. Sometimes you just need to buy yourself time so you can kind of sit back, look at what's happening, think about all the things that you've got stored in your head, and then
Do you mean summon a Tarask?
Let's say your players accidentally suddenly wish a Tarask into it's
No,
stuff
I was
like
saying,
that.
as a DM, you should summon a Tarask at that point.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly one way of dealing with a broken narrative. No, I find that if the players have completely blindsided me and they've done something that I haven't considered, catered for, if it completely out of the blue, first thing to do is have your players start talking to each other, have the characters start talking to each other. Why are we going down this route? Like, what is it we're hoping to achieve? Generally speaking, the only reason you're going to get caught with your pants down this badly is because you've missed out on something that the players have decided on. So by getting the characters and the players to start talking to one another about their future plans, not only does that give you time to think of something to do, but it also gives you an insight into their collective logics. So you can see, oh, okay, I missed that point where they were thinking about this. Let's go with that. And you only have to introduce one cool thing to kind of bring everything back on track. If your players turn around and go, hang on a second, that NPC said that one thing and we think that's worthy of chasing up, you're sat there thinking,
yes, it's true.
Oh, that was just a throwaway sentence that I said.
It's happening now.
That's happening now. So allow your players to double back and go to it. Find out exactly what they think is going on, and then use their ideas to feed them, if in a sense. Sometimes it's not the games master that comes to the table over prepared. Sometimes it's the players. Usually this comes in the form of a 3,000 word backstory essay.
All right, before it starts.
Before it even starts, yes. I am a massive fan of bidding, breaking, and bending backstories.
Oh yes,
So,
are you just?
Oh yes. Now, for me, backstories are the perfect Heart-8 fodder. It is the one piece of narrative that realistically, generally speaking, a player will have crafted independently, free of any constraints of the campaign, of the games master, of other players. This is their thing. This is their truth. Unfortunately, you brought it to my table. So now it's our truth. A lot of the time, especially with these kind of more detailed, more nuanced backstories, there is a very particular set of plot points. There's a very specific set of circumstances or outcomes or scenarios that the player is kind of hoping for. And generally speaking, if you can cater that into your story, fantastic. That's going to bring that player into the narrative, into the campaign. That said, I hereby give you permission as games masters to take those stories that have been lovingly crafted by your players and crush them, twist them, distort them, break their narrative, because that is the exciting piece.
Especially if it's over 10 sentences long.
Yes, right?
Like
So,
at that point, you just know it's you got to do something to it to just...
Yes. I mean, some players may think of their backstories as sacred texts, but the players are also audience members in a sense. They are there to be surprised and excited and scared and overjoyed in equal measure realistically to anyone around the table, right? So if you can do that with their own material, if you can surprise them with their own material, fantastic. I mean, that's something that's really going to hammer home to them stakes within your story, for example. And it will force that player to change very rapidly, change their worldview. If they think that their backstory is ironclad and then you prove it wrong one way or the other, that's fantastic. Just to refer to Critical Role, because Julia and I have been watching Legends of Vox Machina recently. Spoilers. Percy finding out that Cassandra is now allied with the Briarwoods.
Yeah.
In an instant,
Yeah.
Percy's worldview changes. And now the stakes are that much higher, things are more exciting, things are more desperate. As a player, that should feel awesome, even though you've kind of been running up to that point thinking that's not the case. You have to be kind of respectful with this though. Like, don't start rewriting your players' backstories because you don't like them or because you could do it better or whatever. Make sure that if you are going to turn someone's backstory completely upside down, that you do it respectfully, you do it in inverted commas logically or emotionally. You make sure that it makes sense both for you, the player, the story, for everyone around the table. Don't just kill people off because you don't want to deal with them. Like, just be respectful.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it seems like it could be a dangerous thing, but I can say from experience, I have done this spectacularly well at least once. There was a player who was relatively new to D&D. He was playing a first generational half orc whose birth was to bring a warring human and orc tribe together. His birth was auspicious. He went off into the worlds to kind of learn things about the world and then would come back and unite the tribes fully. On the way to his homeland, this half orc was regaling the party with stories about his childhood and the various tribes and the cultures fusing together and the joy and happiness that his return would bring, only to find them all dead upon arrival.
Ooh.
This was Carl's character
Yeah, and I still haven't forgiven you.
in our fourth ed campaign. When group arrived home and found the human tribe slaughtered and realized it was the orc tribe that had done it, group's worldview inverted
Dramatically.
and it completely changed the trajectory of group. And I think
For the best.
I'm happy
For
to
the
say,
best.
yes, the character of group just immediately evolved and flourished into something that we were all kind of rooting behind and getting excited for.
I do remember being very stunned when it first happened, because there was obviously the big description of leading up to the gates and everything, and then that turn of just pushing open the gates and then finding nothing was shocking. And I remember the rest of the table sitting there looking at me sort of like, oh, how's he going to react? And I remember I reacted appropriately, and at the end, thinking the car journey back, I was like, dude.
Yes.
Yeah, I thoroughly applauded you for that.
I mean, the end of that story was the group was still able to become the war chief that would unite the clans. Like, it's, you know, I didn't deny Carl that part of the backstory that he was clearly working towards. I just changed the journey that he had to take to get there.
Very cool.
It was very cool.
So sometimes the players will surprise you. Sometimes you can surprise your players. Sometimes you can surprise yourself. So when you're sat down and you're doing your prep notes, all of your good intentions for like an enticing storyline that really kind of brings everyone together, for better or worse, sometimes that's just not going to translate to a good plot at the table. There might be things that you've forgotten or things that you kind of over or underestimated that just radically change how well you think something's going to land. And it can just be a gut feeling where you think to yourself, I don't think this is right. And in those moments, you yourself as a games master shouldn't consider your own work sacred either. I find that a plot that you as a games master deliver to your players, it is inherently mutable right up until the point where those words leave your mouth. Anything can change up until the point when you say it. Now, sometimes you could think that you've had the best idea and you're about to say it, or you know it's coming up, and then you'll listen to something that your players are saying. It kind of links back to what we were saying at the start. And the players will be just making up ideas or talking silly things. You know, oh, wouldn't it be funny if this whole house was a mimic? And in those moments, if you sit there and think, quite honestly, that's a better idea, then drop what you had. Like, by all means, I mean, again, it's a collaborative storytelling thing. Like, if your players have come up with an idea that in that moment you think that'd be a lot more fun, actually, do it. And also you get that moment where you can slyly smirk at your players and go, oh, the whole house, you say?
And the players will like it because they'll be like, oh, we guessed it.
We guessed
again."
it. Yes.
You're a genius for coming up with this plot. I am, aren't I?
Yes. Now, there are other moments when, and again, this has happened to me. So there are points where you're going through a part of a session and you stop and think to yourself, this isn't actually good. This isn't a good bit of session right now. I need to spruce this up. I need to make this more exciting. What can I do? Now, this is a bit of an emergency ripcord, so I really wouldn't advise doing it all the time. But introducing a random revelation, a plot twist, just something that you hadn't planned for, you hadn't accounted for. It's just whatever comes off the top of your head and you think that will make this scene more exciting, do it, because you've got all the time in the world to retroactively make it make sense. So, case in point, and I don't think I've discussed it with these two, in the Cormier Echoes of War campaign, Arc 1, which was filmed before we went public on YouTube, the Warhounds were tracking down the villain Garabrail, who was the coronal guard of Semberholm. As they were closing in, as things were heating up towards the third act of Arc 1, Badger had a conversation with her mentor, Shana, about the fact that, oh, it might be your friend Garabrail who's the baddie. And then this happened.
Well, there's no easy way to put this, but I think it's Garabrail, Coronal's former head of the guard.
Garabrail cannot have been in Hullock.
Why not?
Because Garabrail has been at Isfel's side ever since the fall of Mithranor.
I'm sorry? What?
The head coronal guard has stood by Ilsevel ever since the cities fell.
But he can't have done. Who's heading up her guard today in Suzail?
It's been Garabrail all along.
It can't be. Garabrail's the one we've been hunting. He hasn't been by Elseville's side. He's been causing chaos and jumping through portals and snatching my friend's family members. It can't be him.
So my confession is that Garabrail did it all along. That decision was made during that roleplay segment.
Oh.
As Julia was having an important RP segment with her mentor, there came a point where I realized this is an important segment and I have nothing exciting to come of it. And in that moment, without really thinking about it, I decided, no. Garabrail didn't die in the destruction of Mithranor. And it was actually, it was Garabrail all along. Garabrail has been alongside Ilsevel. But then I had to think about it a bit more. And then in that moment, I also thought, that's because there's two of them. And that plot twist, which went on to influence the rest of Arc 1 and is now, has repercussions in Arc 2, which is available to watch on the Explorers of Elsewhere channel.
Yes.
That was all off the back of a spur-of-the-moment decision. Where I just took a leap of faith and came up with a new plot point. And judging from the reactions of the players, I think it worked. It was a really big shock. And it led to some really interesting roleplay moments that we just wouldn't have had if I hadn't done it. So I wouldn't always recommend pulling the ripcord, but sometimes it is worth it, because if you can get reactions like that from your players and then make it make sense after, so it looks like you actually planned it all along, it'll be something that much more memorable. So yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to breaking the narrative. Just remember that although you may have spent a lot of time and effort on your notes, the contents of the notes aren't sacred or immutable. They are changeable, and your players will likely force you to change your plans.
Oh yes.
Partway through sessions anyway. In response, it is, with delicacy and respect, it is possible to bend your players' backstories to make their stories more entertaining. And sometimes it's just fine to kind of let go of everything and just throw random plot events out into the wild and see what happens. And be just as surprised as your players were, like I was, when I said that it was Garabrail all along.
Yeah, I think improv beats scripted.
Yeah, it does. Well, on that note, I think it's time to move on. Thanks for watching. Release segments like this from the Tavern Between Dimensions every Friday channel on the Explorers. Otherwise, if you want to listen to the episode in full, check us out on Spotify, Amazon Music.